Excuse me, I'd like to see the G100, please.
The showroom went quiet. Craig Dawson, Skyvault Aviation's top salesman, looked the man up and down. Muddy boots, faded jacket, calloused hands. Craig didn't even try to hide it.
You smell like a barn, buddy. You're tracking dirt all over my floor!
He stepped closer, voice rising.
The G600 is $60 million. You couldn't afford the fuel to look at it.
Then louder, loud enough for every client, every employee, every security camera in that building to hear.
Get out before I call someone to clean up after you.
A woman in pearls covered her mouth, laughing. Two men by the espresso bar pulled out their phones, recording. Nobody said a word in his defense. But what Craig Dawson didn't know, what nobody in that showroom could have possibly imagined, was that before the day was over, he'd be the one begging to be heard. To understand what happened that day at Skyvault Aviation, you need to understand where Byron Brooks came from. Not the version Craig Dawson saw. The muddy boots, the calloused hands, the faded jacket. The real version. The one that started in the dark, long before the sun touched the horizon. Every morning, Byron Brooks woke at 4:15, not because an alarm told him to, because the land did. His bedroom window faced east, overlooking 4,500 acres of East Texas farmland. Red clay soil stretching to the tree line. Pecan groves standing in neat rows like soldiers. Soybean fields that rolled and swayed when the wind came through. Green waves under a pink sky. He'd sit on the edge of his bed for exactly 1 minute. Boots are already waiting by the door. The same pair of Red Wings he'd worn for 3 years. Cracked leather. Mud stained so deep into the stitching, it would never wash out. Byron didn't care. Those boots had walked every inch of his property. They'd earned their dirt. By 4:30, he was outside. The air smelled like wet earth and diesel. A barn cat scattered off the porch railing as the screen door slapped shut behind him. He crossed the yard to his truck, a dust-covered Ford F-250, 10 years old, dent in the rear fender from a fence post he'd backed into during a rainstorm. He turned the key. The engine coughed, then caught. A M radio crackled to life. A weather report out of Marshall. Scattered clouds, high of 92. Good day for the fields. But Byron wasn't heading to the fields today. He drove past the main irrigation hub first, a massive steel and sensor system humming quietly in the dawn light. Most people driving by would see pipes and wires. Byron saw 18 patents. He'd designed this system himself, a network of soil sensors and automated water distribution that cut water waste by 40%. 10 years ago, it was just an idea sketched on a napkin at his kitchen table. Now, it was licensed to agricultural operations in 14 states. Brooks Agricultural Systems. That was the company name on the patents. Not flashy, not trendy. Just his name and what he did. The licensing revenue alone brought in more money each quarter than most people would see in a lifetime. Combined with the land, the crops, the mineral rights beneath the soil, Byron Brooks was worth north of $400 million. But you would never know it looking at him. He didn't own a suit. He didn't wear a watch. His truck didn't have leather seats. He ate breakfast at the same diner in Marshall every Saturday. Scrambled eggs, black coffee, 2 pieces of toast. The waitress called him Mr. B and never once asked what he did for a living. That was Byron. Quiet wealth built in dirt. And he saw no reason to wash it off for anyone. Today, though, he had business beyond the farm. For months, he'd been researching the Gulfstream G600, a private jet. Not for luxury, for logistics. His operations now spanned Texas, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Quarterly meetings with licensing partners in 3 time zones. Commercial flights meant layovers, delays, hours wasted in airports when he could be walking his own land. The G600 made sense. $65 million. He'd done the math. He'd spoken with Sheila Moore, his CFO, twice about it. The funds were ready. All he needed to do was walk into the dealership and start the conversation. So that's what he did. He drove north toward Dallas. No appointment, no entourage, no briefcase full of documents. Just a man in a work truck, boots still carrying this morning's mud, heading to buy an airplane the way most people head to buy groceries. Skyvault Aviation sat beside a regional executive airport. Glass and steel building, cathedral ceilings visible from the parking lot. Through the front windows, Byron could see a polished Cessna Citation rotating slowly on a display turntable. An espresso bar. Men in fitted suits shaking hands. He parked the F250 between a black Mercedes and a white Porsche Cayenne. The truck looked like it had wandered in from another zip code. Byron stepped out, stretched his back, looked up at the Skyvault sign. He didn't check his reflection, didn't wipe his boots, didn't hesitate. He walked straight through the front door. And that's when everything changed. The moment Byron stepped through the door, the showroom shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a room changes when someone walks in who doesn't match the furniture. A subtle tightening. Glances that lasted half a second too long. Conversations that dipped in volume just enough to notice. Byron noticed. He always did. The air inside smelled like leather polish and sandalwood. Some kind of designer diffuser humming near the reception desk. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers, the kind of music chosen by someone who wanted the room to feel expensive without trying too hard. The floor was Italian marble, cream-colored with gray veins. Byron's boots left faint red clay prints with every step, little stamps of East Texas on a surface designed to look untouched. He walked toward the reception desk. A young woman sat behind it, blonde hair pulled tight, headset on, nails freshly done. She looked up. Her smile appeared, then flickered, like a bulb with a loose connection. "Can I help you, sir?" Her eyes dropped to his boots, then back up. She glanced over her shoulder toward the sales floor, looking for guidance. That's when Craig Dawson appeared. Craig moved through the showroom the way a shark moves through shallow water, smooth, confident, always aware of where the money was. Mid-40s, slicked dark hair, a charcoal suit that fit like it was sewn onto his body, silver watch catching the overhead light with every gesture. He'd been Skyvault's top salesman for 3 consecutive years. His secret wasn't charm. It was profiling. Craig could estimate a client's net worth within 30 seconds of them walking through the door. Shoes, watch, car in the parking lot. The math was automatic. He'd already done the math on Byron. "Hey there, buddy." Craig's voice was warm. Too warm. The kind of warmth that came with a hand on your shoulder, steering you toward the exit. "You looking for someone?" Byron met his eyes. "No, I'm looking at the G600. Craig's smile held, but something behind it shifted. A flicker of amusement. The kind of look a grown man gives a child who says he wants to be an astronaut. "The G600, Craig repeated. slowly, like he was tasting the words. You know what the G600 is, right? Gulfstream, long range, seats up to 19, range of 6,600 nautical miles. Byron recited the specs without blinking. I've done my homework. Craig's jaw tightened for just a moment. Then the smile came back, wider this time. He turned his body slightly toward the showroom, toward the other clients, the espresso bar, the junior salesmen watching from their desks. And then Craig laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite exhale. A real laugh. Head tilted back, shoulders shaking, one hand slapping down on the reception counter hard enough to make the pen cup rattle. Nolan! Craig called across the showroom to the floor manager. Nolan, you gotta hear this! The man wants the G600! Nolan Pierce looked up from his tablet. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, reading glasses perched on his nose. He raised his eyebrows but said nothing. That silence was its own kind of permission. Craig turned back to Byron, still grinning. He stepped closer, close enough that Byron could smell his cologne, something sharp and expensive, and dropped his voice to a stage whisper loud enough for everyone within 15 feet to hear. Look, brother, the G600 starts north of $60 million. $60 million. He held up 6 fingers, then added a 0 gesture. You sure you don't mean the G6 golf cart? Laughter rippled across the showroom. A woman in a cream blazer pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. 2 men at the espresso bar exchanged a look that said, "Can you believe this guy?" Byron didn't laugh, didn't flinch, didn't look away. I mean the G600, he said quietly. Craig's grin faded by exactly 1 degree. He straightened up, adjusted his cuffs. Then he made a decision. The kind of decision that looks small in the moment, but changes the course of a life. He decided to wait for Byron out. Tell you what, Craig said, his tone shifting to something almost paternal. Let me grab a few things. I'll be right back. He didn't grab a single thing. Instead, Craig walked past Byron without a second glance, crossed the showroom floor, and approached the white man in a navy polo who had arrived after Byron. Full handshake, warm greeting, immediate attention. Byron stood alone. 5 minutes passed. The receptionist avoided eye contact. She suddenly found something fascinating on her computer screen. 10 minutes. Byron studied the model planes displayed along the far wall. Miniature jets behind glass. He could name every one. 15 minutes. A cleaning crew member appeared near Byron's feet with a mop, pointedly wiping up the mud tracks. Not rudely, exactly, but obviously, making a show of it. From across the room, Derek Adams watched everything. Derek was 28, junior salesman, 6 months on the job. He sat at his desk with his hands flat on the surface, fingers tense. Something about this whole situation made his stomach turn. He stood up, took a step toward Byron. Sit down, rookie. Craig's voice came from behind him, quiet, firm, the voice of a man who didn't need to raise his volume to be threatening. I've got this one, Craig added, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Derek sat down, but he kept watching. Craig finally circled back to Byron. 15 minutes of calculated neglect. He approached with the energy of a man doing someone a favor. Still here? Craig tilted his head, feigning surprise. All right, look. What do you do for a living? Help me understand what we're working with. Farming, Byron said. Craig nodded slowly, his lips pressed together. The amusement crept back into his face like a stain spreading on cloth. Farming. He repeated the word the way someone repeats a bad joke. Farming. Right. Okay. He placed his hand on Byron's shoulder, a gesture that looked friendly but felt like steering, and he began walking Byron away from the G600 display toward the far end of the showroom, the turboprop section. Smaller planes, a fraction of the price. The section where Craig put people he didn't take seriously. "Let me show you something a little more your speed," Craig said. His hand was still on Byron's shoulder. "We've got some nice King Airs over here. Great for short hops. Very practical for a farming operation." Byron stopped walking. Craig's hand slid off his shoulder. "I didn't come here for a King Air," Byron said. His voice was level, controlled. The voice of a man who had spent a lifetime choosing his words carefully. "I came here for the G600. I'd like to see the spec sheet, discuss configurations, and talk about delivery timelines." Something shifted in Craig's expression. The amusement drained out, replaced by something harder. Irritation. Byron wasn't following the script. He was supposed to feel embarrassed by now. Supposed to leave. "Okay." Craig crossed his arms. "Here's the thing. Before I pull up anything on the G600, I'm going to need proof of funds. Bank statement, asset verification, letter from your financial advisor. Standard procedure." "Is it?" Byron's voice didn't change. "Do you ask every client for proof of funds before you show them an airplane?" "It's policy," Craig said flatly. It wasn't a policy. Derek Adams knew that. He'd watched Craig show spec sheets to walk-in clients a dozen times without asking for a single document. As long as those clients looked a certain way, drove a certain car, had a certain color skin. Byron held Craig's gaze for a long moment. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Byron said. Craig waved a hand dismissively, the gesture loose and careless, like he was swatting a fly. "I am the guy you talk to here. Nolan backs me on this." He nodded toward the floor manager. Nolan, still standing by his tablet across the room, gave a slow, confirming nod without looking up. A wall. Polite on the surface, brick underneath. Byron stood in the center of a $60 million showroom, surrounded by jets he could buy outright 3 times over, and not a single person in the building would give him the time of day. The mud on his boots was drying now, cracking into tiny pieces on the marble floor. Craig stared at it. "Look," he said, "I think we both know this isn't really the place for—" "For what?" Byron asked, softly. Craig didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in the showroom heard what he meant. Craig Dawson wasn't done. See, men like Craig don't just turn people away. They make sure those people know they were never welcome in the first place. It's not enough to close the door. They need you to feel the lock click behind you. He stepped closer to Byron, close enough that the scent of his cologne mixed with the faint smell of earth still clinging to Byron's jacket. 2 worlds occupying the same 3 feet of space. "Let me be straight with you," Craig said. His voice had dropped, not quieter, harder. The fake friendliness was gone now, peeled away like old paint. What was underneath was cold and clean and deliberate. "I've been selling jets for 11 years. I know buyers. I can smell them the second they walk through that door." He paused. Let the silence do its work. "And you, my friend, you don't smell like a buyer." He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper, but in a showroom this quiet, a whisper carries like a shout. "You smell like soil, like diesel, like you've been standing in a field since before sunrise. His eyes moved down to Byron's boots, then back up, slowly, deliberately. A full inspection was conducted in front of everyone. This floor you're standing on costs more per square foot than most farms make in a month, and you're tracking mud across it like you own the place. Byron said nothing. His hands hung at his sides, still, patient, like a man watching weather roll in from a distance, knowing exactly when the storm would arrive. Craig straightened up, adjusted his tie, and then he did something he'd never done before in his 11 years at Skyvault Aviation. He pulled out a chair from the reception area, placed it directly in front of Byron, and sat down in it. Not to invite Byron to sit, to block him. Craig crossed one leg over the other, leaned back, made himself comfortable. A human barricade between a black farmer and a $65 million airplane. "Here's what I think happened," Craig said, his tone shifting to something almost philosophical, like a professor explaining something simple to a slow student. "I think you drove past this building on your way to the feed store, saw the planes through the window. Thought it'd be fun to come in and pretend for a few minutes. Play dress up in a world that isn't yours." He smiled, thin, sharp, the kind of smile that cuts. And that's fine. Everyone's got dreams. But dreams don't buy Gulfstreams, buddy. Bank accounts do. And I'm looking at a man whose bank account probably has the same number of zeros as his acreage has mud. From across the room, the woman in the cream blazer was now openly watching, not laughing anymore. Her expression had shifted, somewhere between discomfort and fascination, like watching a car accident she couldn't look away from. The two men at the espresso bar still had their phones out. One of them had switched to video, recording. The other tilted his screen toward his companion and whispered something. They both smirked. Nobody put the phone away. Nobody said, "Hey, that's enough." The showroom had become an audience, and Craig was performing. Nolan Pierce stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, watching the whole thing unfold. His face was neutral. Carefully, deliberately neutral. The expression of a manager who had decided that doing nothing was the same as not being involved. It wasn't. And he knew it. Byron looked at Craig sitting in that chair, looked at the showroom full of people watching him like entertainment, looked at the phones, recording his humiliation in real time. Every face was either amused or deliberately turned away. Not a single ally in the room. Then he spoke, calmly. Each word is placed like a stone. "I drove 45 minutes to get here. I came to spend $65 million. And you won't even show me a piece of paper." Craig uncrossed his legs, leaned forward, and delivered the line that would eventually be played on every news channel in the state of Texas. "Tell you what." His voice was loud now, showroom loud. Performance is loud. "Why don't you come back when you've got something other than mud on your boots and a dream in your pocket?" He stood up from the chair, straightened his jacket, turned to the watching crowd with a grin, as if expecting applause. A few people laughed, short, uncomfortable bursts of sound, the kind of laughter that people produce when they're ashamed of themselves but not enough to stop. One man near the window actually clapped twice, slow claps, like punctuation marks at the end of a cruel sentence. The man recording at the espresso bar gave a thumbs up to Craig, a silent endorsement from a stranger. Craig caught it and winked back. The whole room had become his stage, and every person in it had chosen a side, either laughing along or looking at their shoes and saying nothing. Both choices left Byron standing alone. Derek Adams sat at his desk with his jaw locked so tight his teeth ached. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. Something that felt a lot like watching a line get crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. He wanted to stand, wanted to say something, but Craig's voice echoed in his head. "Sit down, rookie." And the weight of that chair felt like concrete. And Byron Brooks stood in the center of it all, alone, mud cracking on his boots. Jazz is still playing softly through the speakers, the smell of espresso and cologne and marble polish filling a room that had just become something uglier than anyone in it wanted to admit. He reached into his jacket pocket. Craig's eyes tracked the movement. For a half second, something flickered across his face. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The sudden realization that he didn't actually know anything about the man standing in front of him. Byron pulled out his phone, not to show the recording that had been running in his pocket since the moment he walked in. Not yet. That would come later. He pulled out his phone to make a call. Byron dialed a number, held the phone to his ear. The showroom was still buzzing from Craig's performance. A few people were already turning back to their conversations, the entertainment apparently over. The man with the phone had stopped recording, satisfied he'd captured enough content for whatever group chat would receive it later. Craig had returned to his desk, leaning back in his chair with his hands behind his head, grinning, satisfied. The look of a man who believed he'd just won something. The phone rang twice. Then a voice answered. "Sheila," Byron said. His tone was the same as it had been all morning. Level, unhurried, like a man ordering coffee on a Sunday. "I'm at Skyvault Aviation. I'd like to proceed with the G600 purchase we discussed. Can you initiate the wire for the full amount?" A pause. Then, "Yes, the 65 million configuration." Another pause. "Thank you, Sheila." He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket. Craig had heard fragments of the conversation from across the room. He turned his head slightly. The grin was still there, but one corner of it had gone crooked, like a picture frame knocked off center. 65 million, huh?" Craig called out from his desk. He shook his head, chuckling to himself. The laugh was thinner now, hollower. A joke he was telling mostly to convince himself. "That's a good one. That's really good." He leaned forward and tapped his pen on the desk twice. "You should try Hollywood, buddy. You've got the acting chops for it." Two salesmen nearby laughed. Shorter this time. Quieter. Something in the room had shifted by half a degree, like a compass needle trembling before it swings. Byron didn't respond. He simply stood where he'd been standing for the past 20 minutes. Same spot, same posture, same quiet, unreadable expression. But Derek Adams was watching Byron's face, and he saw something he couldn't name at first. Something in the eyes, something steady and deep and completely unmoved by anything that had happened in the last hour. Then Derek recognized it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't defeat. It was patience. The kind of patience that comes from knowing exactly what happens next. 3 minutes passed. 3 minutes of Craig Dawson leaning back at his desk, still wearing that smug grin. 3 minutes of Byron standing motionless near the reception area, hands in his pockets, watching the showroom carry on as if he'd already left. Then the receptionist's computer chimed. A soft sound, the kind of notification that arrives 100 times a day and means nothing. Except this time, the receptionist leaned forward, clicked her mouse, and stopped breathing. Her lips parted. Her hand moved to her mouth. She read the email once, then read it again. Then a third time, her eyes widening with each pass. She turned in her chair. Her voice came out strange, tight, almost cracking. "Mr. Pierce? You need to see this. Right now." Nolan Pierce walked over, casual at first, the pace of a man who expected another vendor invoice or scheduling conflict. He leaned over the receptionist's shoulder, adjusted his reading glasses, and looked at the screen. The color left his face in stages. First the cheeks, then the forehead, then the lips. On the screen was an email from Sheila Moore, Chief Financial Officer of Brooks Agricultural Systems. A formal letter of intent to purchase one Gulfstream G600, fully configured. Attached was a wire transfer authorization from First National Bank of Texas. The number on the screen read $65 million. Below that, a second line, the remaining account balance after the transaction, $383 million. Nolan grabbed the edge of the desk, his knuckles turned white. "Craig." His voice was different now. The careful neutrality was gone. What replaced it was something raw, something close to panic. "Craig, come here." Craig looked up from his desk, annoyed at first. Nolan never called him over like that. He pushed back his chair, straightened his tie, and walked over with the slow confidence of a man who believed nothing in the world could surprise him. Nolan turned the monitor toward Craig. Craig looked at the screen. His smile didn't fade. It collapsed. Like a building losing its foundation, one floor at a time, then all at once. The muscles in his face went slack. His jaw dropped open by an inch. His eyes moved across the numbers, then moved again, then again, as if reading them one more time might change what they said. $65 million. Authorized. Ready to transfer. Account balance remaining, $383 million. Craig's hand came up to his mouth. His fingers trembled against his lips. The watch on his wrist, the silver one he wore like a trophy, suddenly looked like a toy. He turned slowly toward Byron. Byron hadn't moved. Same spot, same posture, same muddy boots on the marble floor. But now the entire room had noticed that something was wrong. The espresso bar conversations had stopped. The man who'd been recording earlier lowered his phone. The woman in the cream blazer stood frozen with her cup halfway to her lips. Nolan's fingers were shaking as he typed Byron's name into a search engine on his tablet. The results loaded in 2 seconds. Byron Brooks, founder and sole owner of Brooks Agricultural Systems, 18 patents in irrigation technology and soil sensor networks. Licensing agreements active across 14 states. Featured in Forbes, Bloomberg, and Agricultural Innovation Monthly. Net worth estimated at north of $400 million. Nolan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He crossed the showroom floor toward Byron, each step heavier than the last. When he reached him, his voice came out thin, stripped of authority, the voice of a man who had just realized he was standing on the wrong side of history. "Mr. Brooks." He paused, swallowed again. "Mr. Brooks, there's been a terrible... Can we start over, please?" Byron looked at Nolan for a long moment. Then he looked past him, at Craig, still standing by the reception desk, pale as the marble under his expensive shoes, at the salesman who had laughed, at the clients who had recorded, at the entire room that had watched a man be humiliated and done absolutely nothing. When Byron finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Not angry quiet. Something worse. Disappointed quiet. The voice of a man who had hoped, just this once, that things might go differently. "I came here to buy a jet," he said. "Drove 45 minutes, had the money ready, had the specs memorized. All I needed was someone to treat me like a customer." He paused. The showroom was so silent that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like thunder. "Instead, I got laughed at, blocked, insulted, told I smelled like a barn, told to come back when I had something other than mud on my boots." His eyes found Craig's across the room. Craig couldn't hold the gaze. He looked down at the floor, at the dried mud prints that had been there for the past hour. The same mud he'd mocked. The same boots he'd laughed at. "You didn't just laugh at me, Craig," Byron said. "You laughed at every person who ever walked through that door and didn't look the way you expected a rich man to look." Byron reached into his pocket. Craig flinched, a small, involuntary movement. But Byron only took out his truck keys. "I won't be buying from Skyvault Aviation," he said. "Not today, not ever." He turned and walked toward the exit. Each boot left one final faint print on the marble floor. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody laughed. The glass door swung shut behind him, and then the showroom erupted. The moment the glass door closed behind Byron, the showroom split open like a cracked egg. Nolan Pierce spun on his heel and pointed at Craig. His finger was shaking. His face had gone from pale to a deep, blotchy red, the color of a man watching his career evaporate in real time. "My office, now!" Craig didn't move at first. He stood by the reception desk with his arms hanging at his sides, staring at the front door as if Byron might walk back in and tell everyone it was a joke, that it wasn't real, that a man in muddy boots couldn't possibly have just walked away from a $65 million purchase because of the way Craig had treated him. But the door stayed closed, and the mud prints on the marble floor stayed exactly where they were. "Craig, now." The office door slammed hard enough to rattle the framed sales awards on the wall. Through the glass partition, every employee on the floor could see Nolan pacing behind his desk, gesturing wildly with both hands. Craig sat in the chair opposite him, shoulders hunched, both palms raised in front of his chest like a man trying to stop traffic. The words were muffled, but the tone carried. Nolan's voice hit pitches it had never reached on a sales floor. Sharp, frantic, the sound of a man calculating losses in real time. Not just the $65 million sale, but the reputation damage, the legal exposure, the corporate fallout that was already beginning to take shape like storm clouds on a radar. Craig's defense came in fragments that leaked through the glass. "How was I supposed to know? He looked like... Nobody walks in here dressed like... I was just doing my..." Each excuse is thinner than the last, each one crumbling before it finished forming. Because there was no version of this story where telling a man he smelled like a barn and belonged at a tractor dealership was just doing his job. Craig knew it. Nolan knew it. Everyone on that sales floor knew it. While Nolan and Craig screamed at each other behind closed doors, Derek Adams sat at his desk and did something quiet, something that would matter more than any shouting match. He opened his laptop. He created a new document, and he began typing a formal written complaint addressed to Skyvault Aviation's corporate parent company. He described everything: the laughter, the chair Craig placed as a barricade. The proof of funds demand was never policy. The 15-minute deliberate wait. The phrase, "mud on your boots and a dream in your pocket." The clients who recorded on their phones. The manager who watched and did nothing. Derek typed steadily for 20 minutes, spell-checked it once, attached his employee ID, hit send. Then he closed his laptop and stared at the mud prints still visible on the showroom floor. Meanwhile, Byron Brooks was already in his truck. He didn't speed, didn't slam the steering wheel, didn't call anyone to vent. He drove the same way he'd arrived, steady, unhurried, AM radio humming low. But his mind was working. Byron had been disrespected before. It wasn't new. A black man with dirt on his hands, walking into rooms built for white men in clean suits. He'd felt the temperature drop 100 times. At banks, at car dealerships, at restaurants where the host looked past him to greet the white couple behind him. Most of those times he let it go, moved on. Life was too short and his land was too wide to carry that kind of weight. But this was different. Craig Dawson hadn't just been rude, he'd been theatrical about it. He'd performed Byron's humiliation like a show for an audience. He'd turned a paying customer into a punchline. That required a different response. Byron picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd saved months ago. A producer at a Dallas television station had given him her card at a business conference. Investigative journalist, consumer protection stories, the kind of reporter who lived for exactly this type of case. Vanessa Cole answered on the second ring. Byron told her everything, calmly, factually, the same way he'd describe a problem with a soil sensor. Here's what happened, here's what I observed, here's what I have. And what he had was substantial. A phone recording capturing every word Craig said, a written timeline of events, and the knowledge that SkyVault's own security cameras had documented everything from multiple angles. Vanessa Cole asked one question. Mr. Brooks, would you be willing to go on camera? Byron looked at the red clay fields passing outside his window. Yes, ma'am, he said. I believe I would. Within 24 hours, SkyVault Aviation's corporate office called Byron directly. The voice on the other end was polished and careful, a crisis management tone, rehearsed and smooth. They offered a private apology, a personal discount, VIP treatment, a dedicated sales representative, everything short of flying the G600 to his front porch. Byron listened to every word. Then he said, "No thank you," and hung up. Craig Dawson was suspended the following morning. Not fired, suspended, pending internal review. SkyVault was still trying to contain the situation, still believing this was a problem that could be managed quietly. They were wrong. The story broke on a Tuesday evening. Vanessa Cole's investigative segment aired during the 6 o'clock news on KDFW Dallas. The title filled the screen in bold white letters against a black background. Turned away in muddy boots. How a Texas billionaire farmer was laughed out of a luxury jet dealership. The segment opened with the audio recording. Craig's voice, clear, sharp, unmistakable, filled living rooms across the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Every word preserved in digital clarity. The tractor dealership comment. The barn smell remark. The $60 million mockery. And the line that would become the centerpiece of every headline that followed. Why don't you come back when you've got something other than mud on your boots and a dream in your pocket? Then came the laughter, captured on Byron's phone. The sound of a showroom full of people laughing at a man they'd decided was worthless based on nothing but his skin color and his shoes. Vanessa Cole let the audio play for 11 uninterrupted seconds. No commentary, no graphics, just Craig's voice and the laughter that followed. 11 seconds of silence from the anchor desk while America listened. Then Vanessa spoke. She detailed the timeline, the 15-minute wait, the proof of funds demand never applied to white clients, the chair used as a physical barricade, the floor manager who watched and nodded along. She interviewed 3 other black professionals, a surgeon, a tech executive, and a real estate developer, who shared their own stories of being profiled at luxury retailers. Different cities, different stores, the same script, the same assumptions, the same look in the salesman's eyes. Skyvault Aviation was offered the opportunity to comment on camera. They declined. Vanessa noted this to her viewers with a single raised eyebrow that said more than any sentence could. The segment was 12 minutes long. By midnight, it had been viewed 2 million times on the station's website. By morning, it was everywhere. National outlets picked it up before sunrise. Cable news ran the audio on loop. Social media detonated. The hashtag #MuddyBootsBillionaire trended nationally within 18 hours. Clips of Craig's voice were remixed, quoted, screenshotted, and stitched into reaction videos that accumulated tens of millions of views. But the clip that spread furthest, the one that became the symbol of the entire story, was the sound of Craig's laugh. That full, head-thrown-back, shoulder-shaking laugh when Byron first said he wanted to see the G600. Isolated from the rest of the audio, it lasted exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds of pure contempt. People shared it with captions like, "This is what prejudice sounds like," and "He laughed at a man worth $400 million. Craig Dawson's face was on every screen in America, and not a single screen was kind. 2 weeks after the segment aired, Byron's legal team filed a civil rights lawsuit in federal court. The defendants? Skyvault Aviation and Craig Dawson individually. The charge? Racial discrimination in a place of public accommodation in violation of both federal law and Texas state civil rights statutes. The discovery phase peeled Skyvault open like a rusted can. Internal sales records revealed a pattern so consistent it could have been policy. Over the previous 3 years, Black and Latino clients at Skyvault were steered toward lower-priced inventory at a rate 4 times higher than white clients. They were asked for proof of funds before viewing aircraft specifications at a rate 6 times higher. Average engagement time with Black walk-in clients was 8 minutes. With white walk-in clients, it was 34. The numbers were devastating. Not because they were surprising, but because they were so precisely documented. Skyvault had been discriminating with the efficiency of an assembly line, and their own records proved it. Derek Adams' written complaint was entered into evidence. His account corroborated every detail of Byron's experience and added context that only an insider could provide. The unwritten rules of the sales floor, the profiling system Craig used, the silent approval from management that kept the machine running. Derek testified in a deposition. His voice was steady. His hands were not. When asked why he filed the complaint, he said, "Because I watched it happen. And watching it happen and saying nothing makes you part of it." Craig Dawson was formally terminated from Skyvault Aviation 3 days after the lawsuit was filed. He attempted to file a wrongful termination counterclaim. His attorney reviewed the audio recording, watched the security footage, read the internal sales data, and advised Craig to drop it. Craig dropped it. The case never reached a full trial. Skyvault's legal team saw the evidence, calculated the exposure, and moved to settle. The terms were announced on a Thursday afternoon in a courtroom presided over by Judge Harriet Wells. Skyvault Aviation agreed to pay $2.8 million in damages. Additionally, the company was required to implement a complete overhaul of its sales training program, establish new anti-discrimination policies with enforceable accountability measures, and submit to independent third-party audits every year for the next 5 years. Craig Dawson, individually, was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service with civil rights organizations. His side real estate license was flagged for review by the Texas State Licensing Board. His name would appear in the public court record permanently, searchable, findable, attached forever to the words he chose to say on a Tuesday morning in a jet showroom. Judge Wells delivered a brief statement before closing the proceedings. She noted that the case reflected not an isolated incident, but a systemic failure, one enabled by individuals who acted with prejudice and institutions that rewarded silence. The courtroom was full. Vanessa Cole sat in the second row, notebook open. 3 cameras recorded the proceedings from the gallery. Byron Brooks sat at the plaintiff's table in a navy suit. First time most people had seen him in one. His attorney sat beside him, reviewing documents. On Byron's feet, beneath the table, out of sight from the cameras but visible to anyone who looked, a pair of Red Wing boots. Clean this time, but the same ones. He never bought a different pair. When the settlement was announced, Byron didn't smile, didn't pump his fist, didn't turn to the cameras. He simply nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who had asked for accountability and received it. After the proceedings, Byron made one public statement, brief, measured, the same voice he'd used in the showroom. This money doesn't fix what happened, but it can build something better. He donated the entire $2.8 million settlement to a scholarship fund for young black entrepreneurs in East Texas. Every penny. The fund was named after his grandmother, who had farmed the same land 3 generations before him. 6 months after the settlement, Byron Brooks bought his Gulfstream G600. Not from Skyvault Aviation. He never spoke to them again. He bought it from a black-owned aviation brokerage in Atlanta called Horizon Wing Partners. A small firm, 3 employees. Run by a woman named Gloria, who had started the company from her kitchen table 8 years earlier. Byron walked into her office on a Wednesday morning. Same Carhartt jacket, same Ford F-250 in the parking lot, same Red Wing boots, freshly muddied from his 4 a.m. rounds through the pecan groves. Gloria greeted him at the door with a handshake and a cup of coffee. No profiling, no suspicion, no whispered jokes behind the reception desk. Just a woman running a business and a man ready to do business. The whole transaction took less than 2 hours. When the G600 was delivered to a private hangar outside Marshall, Texas, Byron stood on the tarmac and watched it roll to a stop. White fuselage gleaming under the afternoon sun, engines ticking as they cooled, the faint smell of jet fuel mixing with the red clay dust blowing in from the fields to the east. He climbed aboard, sat in the pilot's seat, looked out the cockpit window at the flat Texas horizon, the same horizon he'd watched from his bedroom window every morning for 30 years. Beneath his seat, his boots left a faint smudge of mud on the carpet. He didn't wipe it off. Back in Dallas, the ripple effects continued to spread. Skyvault Aviation completed its first mandatory third-party audit. 14 employees underwent new anti-discrimination training. The proof of funds policy, the one Craig had called standard procedure, was formally eliminated from every SkyVault location nationwide. The company issued a public statement acknowledging systemic failures in client treatment. It read like it was written by lawyers. It probably was. Other luxury aviation dealerships took notice. 3 competing firms launched internal audits before anyone asked them to. An industry trade group published new guidelines for equitable client engagement, citing the SkyVault case by name. Byron was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Business Aviation Association's annual conference in Las Vegas. The ballroom held 800 people: executives, manufacturers, brokers, pilots. The kind of room that smelled like the SkyVault showroom, leather and ambition and expensive cologne. Byron walked to the podium in his Red Wing boots. No suit this time. Carhartt jacket, jeans. The mud from that morning's walk through the soybean fields still visible on the soles. He spoke for 11 minutes, quietly. No slides, no notes. Just a man telling a room full of powerful people what it felt like to be laughed at for wanting to spend his own money. When he finished, 800 people stood up. The applause lasted longer than the speech. Derek Adams wasn't at SkyVault anymore either. A competing dealership, one that had watched the case unfold and recognized something rare, recruited him specifically for his integrity. He was promoted to senior sales associate within 4 months, the fastest promotion in the company's history. On his first day, his new manager told him, "You did the right thing when it cost you something. That's the only kind of right that counts." And Craig Dawson? Craig was blacklisted from the luxury sales industry. No dealership would touch him. His name had become a cautionary tale, the kind whispered in training sessions and cited in HR manuals. He took a job at a used car lot outside Fort Worth. Mid-level, commission-based. A fluorescent-lit office with coffee-stained carpet that smelled like old rubber. During the legal proceedings, Craig had been offered an opportunity to issue a public apology. His attorney advised him to take it. The judge encouraged it. Even Nolan Pierce, desperate to distance himself, urged Craig to say the words. Craig refused. That refusal followed him like a shadow. Into every job interview, every background check, every Google search of his name. The man who laughed at a farmer in muddy boots and never once said he was sorry. If this story hit you somewhere real, smash that like button so more people can see it. And subscribe if you want more stories where justice doesn't just whisper, it shows up with receipts. And remember this, the next time you see someone walk through a door looking like they don't belong, think twice. Think 3 times, because you might be looking at the person who owns the whole field. Don't ever judge someone by how they look. Nah, that muddy boots guy, worth more than the whole room combined. Life lesson for the richest people don't need to prove nothing to nobody. So before you laugh at someone, maybe check yourself first. Just saying. Don't ever judge someone by how they look. Nah, that muddy boots guy, worth more than the whole room combined. Life lesson from the richest people don't need to prove nothing to nobody. So before you laugh at someone, maybe check yourself first. Just saying.